And what he did, and I went a stage further and said he was going to fly to the top of St. Paul's Cathedral. And what my man did was to go to the local market and buy every dove, pigeon that he could, and then get his horse to the top with a pair of false wings on. And at the moment the whole of the City of London was waiting for this moment, he would suddenly appear. He let loose all the real birds, so 1,000 birds fly up, and in the middle of them suddenly appears this huge winged horse, as it were, on 2 legs, and therefore all the money comes to him, and he's done it. But the interesting thing is, how did he then get the horse down from the highest point in London to the bottom?
Well, it's a wonderful book. I have to say, as a personal aside, that when Keith said that he would like to dedicate a book to me, he gave me a choice between The Mad Courtesan and its sequel, The Silent Woman. So I mulled that over for a minute, and I realized that what he was saying was that I could either be the slut or the shrew. So I chose, I thought for immortality's sake, the slut would be more fun. But you've had a wonderful time with this series. The Roaring Boy was a nomination, a 1996 nominee for the Edgar Allan Poe Award. And in the current edition of First Magazine, which is, believe it or not, published in Tucson, having started in California, which is a marvelous magazine for book collectors, very much cherished by many of our customers. Keith has written, as Edward Marston, a wonderful article on Elizabethan mysteries, which embraces many books written in this, which has become actually rather popular, although I think you were the lead figure in it. Number of other people working in this area.
Yes,
Patricia Finney.
That's right, Patricia Finney. And the one that I begin with, in fact, is Kenilworth by Walter Scott. Now, as you know, Barbara, because I've taken you to Kenilworth Castle on more than one occasion, I lived 10 miles away, so it's a castle I got to know very well. And in Shakespeare's time, they had this famous celebration. The Earl of Leicester took the Queen along there and had this thing which ran on for several days. It was almost like a coronation. It cost far, I mean, he was always in debt anyway, the Earl of Leicester, but it cost thousands of pounds, which in those days we're talking about £250,000 probably, to set this thing up. It is said that Shakespeare, who was a boy, of course, living in Stratford, just down the road from Kenilworth, came to see this and was so struck by the festivities, he used that as the basis of the Midsummer Night's Dream, the festivities in that, for the celebration of the marriage, as it were. And what was extraordinary about Kenilworth, I thought, was that he anticipated all the kinds of things that people like myself and others have been doing, because it's a murder story, and yet it's also a historical romance. It's a murder story because he takes the Earl of Leicester's wife, Amy Robsart, and shows how she dies, and makes, in fact, a fairly villainous character, a sidekick, the murderer, and makes the Earl of Leicester a villain as well, and party to it. Now, in fact, as you know, historically, she died, and 15 years later we had the Kenilworth Castle extravaganza. But he compresses the two.
And why not?
And actually has her going along in disguise because she suspects her husband is having an affair with Queen Elizabeth, which I think most of the court suspected, with jolly good reason, I may say. And then it's twisted around because the Earl of Leicester suspects that she herself, that his own wife is being unfaithful, so he authorises her death. And then discovers, of course, that she was completely Simon Pure. So there's a penitential scene towards the end. But, I mean, that, in a sense, written in 1821, anticipates what we've been doing in the 1990s.
Well, I love your remark in here that said Elizabethan mysteries are a growth industry, and in fact, all historical mystery at the moment is a growth industry. It's maybe the strongest part of mystery fiction. You have gone on to write a different historical series, still as Edward Marston, which take place during the census that William the Conqueror initiated, known to us today as the Doomsday, or at least recorded to us today in the Doomsday Book.
Yes.
And it's a marvelous vehicle because you've got your census takers basically on circuit, writing about England in, what is it, about 1080?
1086, 1087. It covered that extraordinary period at the end of William the Conqueror's reign. I mean, he needed money. And he needed to have what he called a great survey, which you would call an IRS survey, basically. These were tax gatherers. And he needed to know where the wealth was and how he could raise money quickly from different parts. The problem was that between 1066 and 1086, you had 20 years of Norman overlordship, and what they weren't given legally, they seized. So this survey, if you look between the lines, is full of the most extraordinary misappropriations. And I mean, every single set of returns for each county, and it was a county-by-county survey, can throw up ideas. I could write a dozen novels on each particular county. And what I've done is to take it county by county. I began with Wiltshire, as you know, in the Wolves of Savernake, which is the first one, and set up a situation there which was all based on a forged charter. Now, forging charters was a growth industry, if I may coin a phrase, in those days, and all you had to have was a good scrivener. And the number of people, I mean, bishops and archbishops were not averse to having false charters, to claim things which were not their right. The worst possible person of all was the king's half-brother, Odo, Bishop of Bayeux. Odo was also the Earl of Kent. Now, I now live in Kent, so I was able to get a lot of first-hand information from the cathedral. When Lanfranc became Archbishop of Canterbury, he discovered that many of the church lands had been seized by Odo, Bishop of Bayeux. So he went to the king and said, look, your half-brother's pinched half my land. So they had a famous trial, which took 3 days, at Pennenden Heath, which is by Maidstone. And the Archbishop of Canterbury, Lanfranc, who was also a jurist, who was actually Italian by birth, but had been working in Bec in Normandy, was brought over to be the Archbishop at the advanced age in his late 70s. He conducted his own advocacy against Odo, who expected to win, and who lost, and all those lands were then given back. Now, that situation on a smaller scale took place in every single county, where the local lords or whatever would seize land, and it's only when my chaps come along. And my chaps aren't the initial census takers, Barbara. My chaps are the troubleshooters who come along afterwards.
Like an appellate sort of group.
What happened was that all the information went down to Winchester, which was the capital in those days, not London, and it went down to the Exchequer, and the returns would come in, and they would cover 4 or 5 counties because they were done in little circuits. And the clerks there, and all the clerks were monks obviously, would copy out the detail in fair hand. And then one controlling person would look at them and see where the anomalies were. Then my team of hitmen basically would go out and try and solve the problem, and say they'd go to Wiltshire, they'd go to Yorkshire, they'd go to wherever, and say, when we came before, there was a problem. Now, we've come to sort it out. And of course, there happens to be a murder by the time they get there, so we have that complication. What I found fascinating was the sorts of things which monks who were brought up in monasteries, and celibate gentlemen, as you know, had to write. So that when I looked, for instance, in Essex at the Domesday Returns there was a character whose name was, written down by a monk in fair hand. His name was Humphrey Aureus Testiculi, Humphrey Golden Balls. I thought, I must use this character. I mean, this chap was actually there. Was that a nickname? How did he get it? And as you know, I spent a great deal of time enjoying the speculation as to how this name came about. The theory I come up with, I'm sure, wasn't the right one, but you know, it is a version of events.
Well, it works.
But the idea of a monk just writing down, you know, Aureus Testiculi, it just struck me as so comical.
It's a wonderful place to mine for stories, and you've got Gervais and Ralph, basically like really like judges writing the circuit. That's more or less what they were doing. And you've gone to all kinds of interesting places. The second book, The Ravens of Blackwater, went east.
That's right.
And then you have gone to Wales for The Dragons of Arkenfield. I think that's this book right here. I brought it because I love the cover with the red dragon.
The Dragons of Arkenfield is my favourite because it's set in Wales, and in fact that's dedicated to my father. I was born and brought up in Wales and know that border country extremely well, and Arkenfield was a sort of triangle of land just to the west of Hereford and between that and Monmouth, which was neither Wales nor England, as it were. It was part of England technically, but it was allowed to keep its Welsh customs. And therefore it was a no-go area between the two, and there was an enormous amount of border warfare, as you know, and therefore if something happened in that area, that was a place where Anglo-Welsh warfare could spark off very quickly. So it was an ideal area to look at that. And it was a way of using one of my protagonists, Gervais Brett, who is the serious lawyer of the partnership. The other one, Ralph Delchard, of course, is a soldier and a man of action, and you needed to be a man of action simply to survive, of course, in that period. And he always brings a retinue of his own knights with him to protect them. But Gervais, as the name suggests, Brett, B-R-E-T, is half Breton. And Breton is a cognate language with Welsh. I grew up speaking Welsh, and when I would go to Brittany, I could sing Breton folk songs because they were remarkably like Welsh folk songs. And therefore, my man can speak enough Welsh to understand what the Welsh are saying, and that makes him enormously useful. His mother was a Saxon, so he can also speak English, or Anglo-Saxon, if you like, as it were. So he's also an interpreter. And his ability to straddle the three cultures, as it were, is absolutely vital.
Absolutely.
So in number 7, which I'm writing at the moment, which is up in Chester, we have the same problem of the border warfare with the Welsh, and his knowledge of Welsh again is crucial.